Welcome back to Taiwan Outlook. We've been talking about human rights situation in China. Our two guests are Dr. Ansley and Mr. Zhang. Dr. Ansley, you've been a human rights lawyer, and as a lawyer, monitoring the human rights situation in China, what do you think are the most important human rights abuses in China now?
Well, there's no question at all that the theft of organs from Falun Gong victims, and also I might say from other prisoners, there's no question at all that that is the most horrendous abuse of human rights in China that I think we need to address. In more general terms, we should never lose sight of the fact that China executes more people than all other countries in the world combined every year. We don't really know how many. Amnesty International has estimates that, in my opinion, are quite low, simply because Amnesty doesn't count as in their statistics anything that they can't document, which means they're usually limited to what's been reported in the paper. But we have high-ranking Chinese government spokesmen defending their record, saying that, oh, we don't execute that many. It's not much more than 10,000 a year. I would estimate that it may be as high as 30,000 a year. And there are two observations I would make. One is that if you understand the Chinese judicial system, many people say, well, if they're taking the organs of prisoners, that's all right, because these people have been condemned anyway. They're guilty, they're criminals, and they don't need their organs anymore. I have big problems with those kind of statements on a number of levels, but in particular, if you know the complete lack of due process in the Chinese judicial system, the best you could say is that some of the people who have been convicted and sentenced to death may be guilty. No reason to think they are, but some of them might be. But being convicted by a Chinese court is not very convincing. And the second thing is that the judicial system has been further perverted and corrupted by this organ harvesting because we have joint committees made up half of judges in the criminal courts and half doctors from hospitals that are looking for organs, and so they coordinate. When they have a paying customer coming from the West usually, willing to pay $75,000 for a kidney or twice that for a heart, then they have all these prisoners whose blood types and tissue types have been fed into computers, and they can now pick them, and they schedule their executions as the organs are required. And that immediately raises suspicions about, are people really being executed because they're criminals, or are there more executions and more abuses because of the shortage of organs?
So you think there's a government or state-sponsored, organ harvesting in China?
There's no question at all. There's a very large number of hospitals that have been involved in doing these organ transplants, and until very recently, until they were exposed by the Matus-Kilgore report, they had websites where they advertised openly how many organ transplants they'd done in the last year, and statistically it was absolutely impossible. That there was no way they could do this number of transplants without having a major source of living people standing by waiting to be unwilling donors. And there's no way that those hospitals could operate openly like that without government knowledge and approval.
One of the most difficult tasks in monitoring China's human rights situation is the information. Because so far, China is not very transparent. So, Mr. Zhang, could you tell us or give us some ideas about how serious is the organ theft, organ harvesting situation in China now?
Well, we have seen the report, and we know that David Kilgore and David Matus, they have people calling different hospitals, not just in one region, but throughout China. to ask the organ transplant doctors, do you have organs that from Falun Gong practitioners? One of the reasons they take organs from Falun Gong practitioners is these people do meditation. They're supposed to have better, health, and the organs supposed to be healthy. Another reason is that many Falun Gong practitioners, when they were taken to labor camps or jail, they refuse to disclose their names because they don't want their relatives and homes and families and workplace to be jeopardized because of their, incarceration. So then they become nameless prisoners, and it's very easy for these people to disappear among the prison population for organ, involuntary organ theft.
Yeah, but as a result of many international pressures, China also tried to respond in some way or another to the international pressures. As we know, China also passed laws, banning this kind of illegal transplants.
Well, they had laws, that prohibit, the organ, so-called the involuntary organ transplant. But, right before the David Kilgore's and David Mata's report, after the news first was released in March, 2005, then the Chinese government, passed a law to say that, we are going to stop the organ transplant abuse. But later, then a year later, the Chinese government passed another law to further enhance this, regulation, which means that the first law didn't work. All, the earlier laws, never, had any effect on the practice anyway. So. Well, the reason that the most recent law was passed was because that the Olympic Games is coming closer, and then the news of the organ harvesting from Falun Gong practitioners is in the international press. And later, because the World Health and Medical Association also pressure Chinese medical association that in order to keep your membership here, you have to be transparent and have to stop the practice. And that's when the Chinese Medical Association they agreed to the terms set by the World Medical Association.
But in addition to the organ transplanting or harvesting problems, what are other human rights issues or abuses that we should pay attention to in China?
Well, we have gross violations of the right to freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, freedom of political belief. All of these things are guaranteed in the Chinese Constitution, but as Jiang Zemin and others have commented, the Constitution isn't really a law. We're not really sure what it is, but it's there for reference. And when people have their rights violated, for example, as I say, the Constitution guarantees freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, but God help those who try to exercise it, or turn up to register a new political party. They end up doing 12 or 13 years in jail for doing what the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights says they have a right to do, and which China has signed but not yet ratified, but supposedly is not supposed to act against once it has signed it. And when these rights are violated, the Beijing regime has made a big show of creating a legal system which is totally controlled by their puppet strings from behind the scenes. But a great many courageous lawyers have stood up and tried to defend the victims of these violations. And the result is that the lawyers are in jail as well.
Right.
Lawyers have been beaten just last night. As a matter of fact, the report came out of Zhang Anchong, who's one of the most well-known lawyers, who's already served a 3-year prison term for representing about 500 people who were evicted from their houses to make way for a developer. He went to jail. His lawyer, Guo Guoting, went, he didn't actually go to jail. He was arrested. He was under house arrest. And fortunately, we were able to get him out of China, and he's now a refugee in Canada. But overwhelmingly, these lawyers are beaten, incarcerated. Their families are intimidated.
But I think the reason why Chinese government are becoming more aggressive in cracking down those human rights activities or lawyers, probably maybe because of the international ignorance or decide to ignore the human rights situation in China. What can we do to get the attention from the outside world to that kind of deteriorating situation in China?
Well, the international community should realize that by holding Beijing to be responsible for their behavior according to law is in their own interest. For example, 3 decades ago, when the U.S. Congress approved the PNTR, favorite trade nation status to Beijing, they were hoping that with the economic reform that there would be a consequential political reform in Beijing. But 3 decades later, based on the report by the Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, human rights record has deteriorated instead of being improved. And it shows that the strategy to use economic development to bring about a political change or human rights improvement is illusion. And in fact, this economic so-called growth has actually brought so-called legitimacy to the government. They say, look, with our style of government, we have a higher growth, economic growth, than those countries in the democratic states. And also, if you notice, instead of the Western countries injecting the universal human rights values and democratic institutions to China, we are seeing that Beijing has changed the behavior of the West, and which is very disturbing. And we see one after another, the Western corporations like Yahoo and Google, Microsoft, they are selling the censorship technology to Beijing. If you notice, since the year 2000, Beijing has appropriated $800 million US dollars to build up the Golden Shield firewall system. And just 2 years ago, the Chinese premier appropriated another $1 billion to beef up the internet, censorship system. So there are only 3 gateways: Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou, for the Chinese internet to be accessed to the world cyberspace. So essentially, the Chinese internet is an intranet. Yeah. And when the population in China is, the information access is controlled by the state, the people are essentially, we have 1.3 billion people brainwashed, with the every daily, propaganda from the state-run media machinery. And myself, I grew up in China. I know how this, really impact not just what we know, but also how we think. And that's very scary because they use nationalism, they use the so-called patriotic sentiment to really rally people behind them and cover up not only the crimes, but also to support the regime's initiatives, which actually turned out to be very harmful to us.
Mr. Zhang, you posed a very important and very interesting question. That is, by engaging China, are we changing China or China changing us? So when we come back, we'll talk about a better or the best strategy or approach to influence China, try to bring China to the international community and try to keep China in check in terms of human rights. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this message.